to segment 4.7, and we'll discuss now genericide. Now I would indicate that one of the clearest examples of this is the note that I have in the textbook itself. I'm on page 190. And this is in relation to the Google company itself. If you were to, in the early 2000s, for example, it may say, well, search on Yahoo, or search on Alta Vista, or a number of other search engines to actually search. And it was the same actually starting out even for Google. So search on Google. It was just another website. There was another search engine that you could search on. But over time, so many people started to use the term Google, or rather, so many people stopped saying search on Google and just started saying Google it. You could do everything on Google, so just go ahead and Google it and find out. But it is that precise type of scenario that a lot of companies fear. It's a good thing from the point of view of suddenly their mark or their term is so pervasive in the market that people are simply using it to so much. The downside is that it may no longer associate or be associated with an exact source of the good. So if I indicated go ahead and Google it, I'm not indicating to you to go on Google or on Yahoo or on Bing or any of the other search engines. I'm simply saying search for it. And that is exactly what's going on with genericide. It's when, for example, the term is no longer being used to convey a source of a good. The term is being used for the actual, what they call genus or classification of the goods. Now I have two different questions for you, and that is, who decides if the mark is generic? And to answer that actually takes into account two different perspectives. The first perspective is from the relevant public. And at the bottom of page 190, they say, it is not necessary to show that the relevant public uses the term to refer to the genus. Rather, the correct inquiry is whether the relevant public would understand the term to be generic. So first off, we're looking at this from the consumer's point of view. When they hear that term, are they thinking source, or are they just thinking, in essence, for purposes of our discussion, almost think of it as a verb, or just a general classification of goods? And I have some examples for you that will look more clearly at a classification of goods itself. The second question is, what is the form to remove trademark protection? And that is also in relation to the second part of the first question, namely who decides if the mark is generic. And that is a team of trademark judges at the TTAB. So this is the Trademark Appeals Board. They come together, and it's usually a panel of 3 judges, and they ask, is this mark generic? So it is from the point of view and perspective of the general public to evaluate whether or not they would construe that term as being generic. But the evaluation and analysis of that generic perception is actually done by a panel of 3 judges. So the form to actually remove a trademark and find that it's potentially generic actually is through the TTAB. And I've actually sat in on a number of cases where the argument was being made that the mark was generic. And you have the judges that listen to the attorneys arguing why it is either generic or why it is not generic. And it goes back to whether or not secondary meaning is still being established, whether or not in the mind of the general public, whether or not they actually view this as being a generic term or one that actually conveys a source of a good. Okay, so let's dig into the slides a little bit. If a potential buyer understands a term to refer to a category of goods or services as opposed to the source of the goods, as I've indicated, the term is generic. And there's 2 different categories here, and that's a word that is already generic, so that would connote some type of category. The second would be a distinctive trademark that loses its protection because it now is suffering from generic use. So I have a few examples there: trampoline, aspirin, cellophane, thermos, and even shredded wheat. Each of these at one time actually had distinctiveness associated with that mark. But through use of that, the term itself became so ubiquitous within the market that people just started to use it not with reference to the source, but with reference to a particular or to a category of goods and services. So you see on the left-hand side, you have bubble wrap. I'm sorry, that's on the left-hand side. We have bubble wrap. On the right-hand side, you actually have dumpster. Now the dumpster itself was actually initially the product was essentially these big waste receptacles, and it was manufactured by a company called Dempster Brothers, DEMPT SER. So Dempster was actually the name of these of the company that produced these trash receptacles. And over time, people stopped saying, "Hey, throw it in the trash can associated with Dempster." They simply said, "Hey, throw it in the dumpster." And so it was this morphine of the protected name Dempster that actually caused them later on to lose protection for that. Left-hand side is ping pong. Again, it used to be connoted with, or used to denote a particular source. It lost that over time and began to be referenced just as the general game of having a ball on a surface, as we see with ping pong today. Right hand side is escalator, same as X scenario. Yeah, it actually used to designate a particular source. Over time, it lost that particular, it no longer referred to this source as it did to the genus of class, namely movable stairs going up.